Welcome to the Human Project. The discussions on this channel are basically about Marxism, but I want to present a new way of understanding Marxism, kind of a new approach, putting it in a much broader, deeper historical perspective. Uh, the reason I call it the Human Project is that the goals laid out by Marxism of achieving a different form of society, a society of equality and harmony, this is a goal that's been with us from the very beginning of civilization, really the beginning of humans being humans. So, for instance, in Egyptian civilization, we see the concept of Ma'at, which governed the society in a way, um, which they envisioned as a condition of stability, harmony, justice, equality, um, harmony between humans and nature, among humans with each other, and humans with the divine. Similarly, in Christianity, the idea of the kingdom of God um, was really a similar idea. And as Hegel kind of extracted the key ideas of this, it was the same thing. Harmony among people, between people and nature, and between people and the divine, a kind of return to the divine. And Hegel's really, his whole life project was about how do we achieve that. And this is very often not understood about Hegel. But then when we look at Marx, we see the same thing. He spells it out in the very beginning, his earliest works, 1844. What kind of society is he envisioning? And it's the exact same as what Hegel came up with in his vision of the kingdom of God. Same thing. But what's different with Marx than with all these previous visions was Marx had an idea, how do we get there? And it wasn't just, okay, we're going to chant and dance around the maypole. It wasn't, well, we're going to have these priests and spend our lifetime studying certain things until we achieve this. And same thing with organized religion, where, okay, we go and pray, we do this and we that, follow certain ethical principles, and then maybe we can achieve that state. Marx said if we want to achieve that state, it's not just a matter of wanting to, it's we really have to. That history is moving us toward this, whether we really want it or not, it's happening. That's something I'll discuss in a minute. But Marx is saying if we want these changes that we imagine heaven on earth, we have to take care of it on earth. And the key way of doing that is to eliminate class society. Now, so just for example, let's go back to Egypt. They had this wonderful vision of Ma'at, but it also so happened that they had a society where the kings or pharaohs kind of had everything, and then 70% of the people or something like that were serfs and slaves. So I don't know if the serfs and slaves were eligible for achieving Ma'at. I'm not sure exactly how it worked. And interestingly, the things I read about Egypt don't talk about that. But certainly harmony, the idea of harmony, how much harmony can there be between the slaves on the one hand and kings on the other hand? It certainly wouldn't work very well today. So the reason I call it the Human Project is that it's persisted as a kind of a permanent motive for human beings all through history. And I think it's important to really emphasize that. So what Marx comes up with, it's not like, oh, here's this guy in Europe and, 18 whatever, dreamed this thing up. No, this idea of a perfected society has been with us from the beginning. The moment humans became human, they're thinking, something is wrong here, there's some kind of imperfection. I've been put in a world where I'm separated from the Great Spirit. I don't know how that happened. I'm trying to look around me. Things don't look exactly right. They don't look real. I need to get back to the Great Spirit. And so humans weren't just thinking, hey, this is great, I'm a human, I can speak, I can do this, I can do that, communicate, write, eventually we're going to do mathematics, build things. Humans, the original humans, aren't thinking that. They're thinking mostly, something's terribly wrong here. I've been dropped out of a perfected world into this imperfect world. Now it's interesting to think, how did humans get that idea? Why did they think that? But they did. So then they want to spend their whole life dancing, chanting, doing whatever it takes. And even when they get buried, they have to be buried in a certain alignment, certain position, to make sure that they can reunite with the Great Spirit. Um, so we've had that all along. I don't need to repeat it again. And what Marx says is, this time we have to be conscious of what we need to change on the earth in order to achieve that. Okay, so in this way, my presentations about Marxism are going to have a sort of a much broader perspective than the ones that you see mostly available today. Now, a key idea of Marx is that human society began with just, say, hunter-gatherers. It wasn't class society. There wasn't a division among people of like who's doing what. It was just kind of, hey, we're all doing things together. You're hunting, I'm gathering, but we're all kind of together. At some point, things started getting unequal. And certainly by the time the early Egyptian civilizations came around, I don't know the exact timing here, but we're going back to 10, 15, 20,000 BC, maybe even way before that. You start having some people are working and some people are owning. So, for instance, by the time we get to the pharaohs, they're not out there in the fields, planting crops, stuff like that. They're up in there, whatever they lived in, doing whatever they did. But so they're ruling and they're owning, and other people are working and not owning. So somewhere along the line, society got divided up like that. And that's what Marx called class society. So, and then society evolved through various forms of class society, where we define classes according to who's doing what and who's owning what, who's doing the work, who's owning the products of the work. So class society evolves through various forms. So first it has the, kind of what we call ancient society, where you had serfs and so on, and then rulers. Then it evolves through various forms of feudalism, which was this similar idea, but more complex divisions and several more classes. You had, craftsmen and I don't know what else. My computer screen has disappeared. Okay, so then it evolves to capitalist society, where you have two basic classes, the people who work and the people who own. Now, in the early days of capitalism, it might have looked that simple, but as capitalism evolved, it's a little more complicated today, where you have a lot of entrepreneurs, you have small businessmen, stuff like that, business persons. But still, the basic idea is that some people are doing the work and some people mostly are owning. And so we see that today, where a small group of people is accumulating more and more wealth, and the great majority of people who in some way or another produce the wealth don't have any, and will have less and less. So that brings me to, society, it evolves through these forms, and that it's a natural evolution. Marx liked the idea of, Darwin's evolution, and he applied that to history and showed that these forms going one to another sort of naturally progress. By that each form has its own sort of logic, and it moves, kind of develops and develops, and it starts falling apart. The very same things that developed it now start destroying it. So then it evolves into the next form, and not just evolves, but sometimes people have to do it. So there's wars, revolutions, and so on. So then we get to where we are today, where what originally fed and built capitalism is now destroying it. Um, I'll get into more details of that another time. But I think what we're seeing today is what we could call, well, I'm calling it civilizational collapse. Originally I thought, okay, we're seeing the end of 500 years of colonial rule and of that, the racism that went with it, and now we're going to see the beginning of a new form of non-exploitative society. But then I started seeing, with the help of many YouTube videos and so on, that it's not just colonial rule that began around the 1500s, but it's so-called Western civilization that began with the conquest of Egypt in 500 BC. So starting with Greece and Rome, a certain way of thinking, a certain way of doing. So we're going all the way back there as far as what needs to be overturned, a way of being on this planet that needs to be overturned. But then, if you really think about it, it does go back to what Marx talked about, class society itself. That the whole organization of society into unequal classes, that's coming to an end. So there are various levels of what's coming to an end, but I really believe that that's where we are right now, that a whole historical cycle of exploitative forms of social organization and exploitative ways of thinking that justifies those forms of organization, that is falling apart, it's reaching its end. But it's not going to just reach its end all by itself. It's either we're going to crash and burn, or we're going to find a way out. And so that's the whole purpose of learning Marxism and of learning how to think about the world and how to understand what's going on. And I certainly don't see any other form of thought or theory, whatever, that even begins to try to understand what's going on in the world. The only thing is that some of these right-wing people, of course, are into Christian ways of explaining the end times and the rapture or whatever they think is going to happen. But aside from that, I don't see anybody really trying to have a comprehensive explanation of what is going on. And I think Marxism provides that explanation. So in future talks, I'm going to be discussing all the various facets of what we call Marxism, except trying to see it in a broader, more human way of thinking. Now, there are some very excellent presentations of Marxist economics, and particularly with Richard Wolff, Michael Hudson, very clearly explaining what's going on. And so I don't see any need to reproduce what they're saying. Well, except I'll say this. We're seeing how China is really surpassing us. And even I'm shocked at how fast that's happening. Just 3 years ago, it's like, well, maybe someday China will surpass us. But then today you open your eyes and it's already happened. Now, how did it happen? And I think some of these Chinese people showing up on TikTok, actually they know the explanation. And it's not hard, and it's important for us to know it. China is what we call a mixed economy. So they have plenty of entrepreneurs, plenty of capitalists, plenty of business going on. But the government places limits on how much wealth people can accumulate, and it forbids or prevents, or tries to prevent, using that wealth for political power. So those are the two differences. Then China, the Chinese government, will use that wealth for public purposes. It invests in infrastructure, invests in education, invests in transportation, and so on, research. Our country is doing less and less of that. There's been very little investment in infrastructure for years. Our educational system is literally falling apart, and so on. And so now we're at a point where we're paying the price. We can't compete because we've spent too many years not investing. So where did the money go? Well, it went into private hands of private people getting richer and richer and using that money to invest in getting even richer. So that's what's called financialization. rather they don't want to hand the money over to the government, and they make sure there's a government that's going to keep reducing their taxes, so they get to keep more of their money and just spend it however they want to make even more money and to get even more power. And Marx predicted this. So here we are, and that's what's going on, and I think that's enough for our introductory presentation.